one of the problems with renewable energy, wind power, solar power, the two that come to mind right off the bat, is that they produce power when the wind is blowing, in the case of wind, and when the sun is shining, in the case of solar, which doesn't necessarily always line up. In fact, sometimes it seldom lines up with when the electricity is actually needed. So that's held back the development of renewable energy because, till now, there's been no way to store electricity. No effective way, no efficient way of storing electricity. Basically, when you make electric power, you need to put it right away into some power lines and send it somewhere where it's going to be used. And if you don't have a market for it in your own province, then you need to send it somewhere else. British Columbia, Saskatchewan, wherever. Although, honestly, we tend to bring in more from British Columbia than we ever send to them. We generate a lot of our electricity in this province, far too much of it, by burning coal. In fact, it is just now that the oil sands cumulatively have overtaken the half a dozen or so coal-fired electric generating stations in this province as the bigger source of greenhouse gases. That's always bugged me a little bit because the environmental movement comes down on the oil sands like oil isn't a problem. You know, when you burn petroleum products, they produce greenhouse gases no matter where they came from originally and where you're burning them. Okay? When you burn fossil fuels, it happens. And so I've always thought that it is massively unfair and ill-informed for the enviros to go after the oil sands, the tar sands as they like to call them. It always makes me suspicious that there's something more going on and there's some funding coming from people who just don't want to see the oil sands develop because it'll cost them market share, quite frankly. And it's always bugged me that coal gets a virtual free ride. It's enough of a problem here in Alberta. It's a huge problem in the United States and a massive problem in China. Altogether, coal is massively contributing more to global warming, to greenhouse gases, to climate change, to whatever you want to call it, than the oil sands are. But when you're making electricity from coal, you got to run your coal-fired generating station pretty much 24/7. Because they're not easy to turn on and turn off. With wind power, with solar power, if the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining, you're not making electricity. But what do you do when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing? Well, sometimes if you go down around Pincher Creek, you'll see the windmills aren't turning because there's no need for the power that they could make. What if you could store that? Well, maybe now you can, and we're going to talk about that next. I'm Dave Taylor.
This month, you can see generosity growing. Spruce It Up Garden Center is our hero of the month for April. A portion of every purchase you make this month at Spruce It Up Garden Center will be generously donated to the Calgary Children's Foundation. Jaden has a great...
Take forward some garages oil.
He doesn't just talk about news and politics, he's lived it. You're listening to Dave Taylor in the afternoon on Calgary's breaking news and conversation station, News Talk 770.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dave Taylor. My phone number, 403-974-8255 in Calgary, 974-TALK, 1-800-563-7770, long-distance toll-free. You can text me at 770-770, and you can reach me on Twitter at DaveTaylor_AB. One of the things that's been holding back renewable energy, wind power, solar power, in this province, in this country, and around the world, has been our inability to store electricity in any kind of meaningful, effective way. Storing the electricity produced by renewable energy is the key to making the technology viable. So, can we do that now? I'm not sure. I got an email from my next guest a couple of days ago, a guy by the name of Peter Bubik, who's with a company called Turning Point Generation here in Calgary. And the email, although a bit on the technical side, seemed to indicate that they have come up with a way called pumped hydro storage to store electricity and make wind power a whole lot more viable as an energy source, as a sort of electricity than it has been. So I thought we'd call him up and see if we could learn some more. Peter, hi.
How are you doing, Dave?
Good, thank you. Yourself?
I'm great.
Okay. So first of all, tell me a little bit about yourself. Give me some sense of, your qualifications, your expertise in this area, and tell me a little bit about your company, and then tell me what pumped hydro storage really is all about.
Sure. So I've started my career in renewable energy about 13 years ago with Canadian hydro developers here in Calgary.
Right.
Really, they are a great company that was a pioneer in bringing renewables into Canada. And in 2004, started contracting for myself, then joined Hatch engineering firm and worked with them on on wind, wind farms in Alberta, throughout Canada, and really around the world. So, been doing that since with Hatch since 2005, and up until recently when we started Turning Point Generation, a company that believes where we hope to enable more renewable energy onto the Alberta system. And so that brings us to what is pumped storage hydro.
Yeah.
Pumped storage hydro is really a technology that's not new at all. This has been around for well over 100 years. It's a subset of hydroelectricity.
Okay.
Works basically the same as your hydroelectricity. The only difference is that when we have surplus of power, we pump water up the hill, and then when we need power, we let the water go down the hill and generate electricity, and we put it on the grid.
Okay. So I can understand doing that with water. How do you do that with wind?
Oh, it's so we are connected to the same system as the wind farms are. So it's not a direct mechanical interconnection. It's actually the two are not mechanically connected. The two are electrically connected. So when the wind farms are running at night and they're producing lots of power and the power is not necessarily needed, then we draw the power from the grid and we pump the water up the hill into a lake and we store it until it's needed.
Okay. So you're not precisely storing electricity. You're storing the capacity to make electricity.
That's right. I think the more accurate way to put it is that we are storing the energy. We are storing the electrical energy in the form of potential energy on top of the hill.
Okay. So if this is not new technology, although I guess connecting it to the wind farm so that the wind farm is producing the surplus electrical energy that you're now pumping up the hill to store in the as water in the reservoir above the turbines, why has nobody thought about this before?
Oh, people have. There is a number of these projects around the world. To be more precise, there's probably about 280 of these projects. About 30 of them in North America.
Most of the rest in Europe, I would suspect.
Yes, Europe, but some in Asia as well. There's one in Canada on the Niagara River. Fairly low head, and that's been around for quite some time. There's another one that's being proposed in Marmora in Ontario, because Ontario is having the same challenges with surplus wind. So there's another one proposed by Northland Power in Marmora, but none in Alberta. And we'd like to change that. I think it's going to empower more renewable energy on the system, and that's a good thing.
Okay, let me take a quick break. Peter, stay with me, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we come back. Peter Bubik is my guest from Turning Point Generation. Storing electricity, storing renewable electrical energy. We'll talk some more about that when we come back. I'm Dave Taylor. of Turning Point Generation. I've got a text here, Peter, so I might as well hit you with this right now before we go any farther. It says, "You sure this guy isn't just pumping the stock price?"
No, I'm pretty sure we're not just pumping the stock price. In fact, we're not pumping anything right now. We're looking at developing this project to be part of the mix. And when you look at it, any generation has the ability to bid on the market, and they can offer whatever energy they will offer, and at whatever price they bid it in, right? So from that perspective, we'd be no different than any other generation when we're generating.
Okay.
So the vision here is that this would be owned by somebody who owns wind farms or other generation assets, that they would be basically just hedging their bets, hedging their risk against low prices or drops of prices.
Yeah. Because the problem, of course, with wind energy, just like the problem with solar energy, is that you can't always guarantee that the sun's going to shine when you need electricity. You can't guarantee that the wind's going to be blowing when you need electricity, and perhaps even worse, you can't do anything when the wind is blowing and you don't need the electricity.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right. And so this, it's all a statistical game. We also, you can't guarantee me that your grandma will turn on the oven at the precise time when we turn on the power plant, right? But it all comes down to statistics. It comes a wash. What we have been seeing in Alberta over the past, probably since 2009, is that because we have all the wind farms in the southern end of the province, and they're fairly concentrated together, when the wind comes on, it comes on for everybody at the same time. Mm-hmm. So prices drop significantly.
Yeah.
And this, of course, is bad news for the wind farm owners. This is actually great news for the consumer. Mm-hmm. One could argue that, and I think there is graphs to show this, that wind right now is the only thing that lowers your average cost of electricity on your power bill.
Mm-hmm.
And these are not my numbers. This is AESO's published numbers.
Yeah.
The industry refers to it as the wind discount. Basically, the wind comes on all at the same time, the prices drop. What do we do now? Well, if you had the ability to store it from, when the prices are super low, when nobody's making any money, and it doesn't take very long, maybe 8 hours, 10 hours, until the time when the power is really needed at the peak, then you may be actually making better use of the infrastructure that you have in place.
Okay. So this technology helps to an extent, but I wouldn't think that it solves the problem overall of how you store electricity, because you need to operate. You need the wind generated power to push the water uphill into a reservoir. So that suggests that you can't do this on flat land. You need some other way of storing more massive amounts of electricity than this stored hydro storage, right? The pumped hydro storage.
That is true, but around the world, about 99% of the electricity that gets stored, or energy that gets stored, I guess electrical energy that gets stored, is stored in this way. Mm-hmm. If you take all the batteries of the world and all the flywheels of the world,
yeah,
and all redox batteries and all the other technology, and sum them all up, they will amount to less than 1% of the amount of energy that is stored. This is, it doesn't solve the problem, but just like anything else, it's one piece of the puzzle. There is what you described is quite common thought process that we've observed. Those of us that are in the industry, it goes something like this: wind is needed, but wind is not dispatchable, so we need storage. pumped storage hydro is the most efficient, but it's not easy to build, and it's, you have limited opportunity, limited amount of space. Let's look at batteries. And people flock to batteries. And I'm not saying they shouldn't, absolutely, especially when we try to address the climate change in what India and China are contributing. Of course, batteries are going to be part of the solution. But we're not there yet, and we have this wonderful technology that it has been tried and tested, and it can be done, and it can be done here in Alberta, and hopefully we'll get to do it.
And give me a sense, just dream big. If this was fully developed out, how much, I know, express it as a percentage, express it however you want, how much of a difference could this make in terms of making use of renewable energy in Alberta?
If I were to dream big and not crazy, but just realistic, I believe that all of Alberta future demand can be met with renewables as long as there is enough storage. So what I mean by all of future demand, I'm not saying we're going to scrap all the coal and all the gas all at once. Of course we're not. But we're going to be retiring coal. That is going to be replaced by gas generation, as it should be. But the AESO is estimating that there will be an increased demand about 2 to 3% per year for the next 20 years.
This is demand for electricity. This is not demand for all energy.
That's right. This is demand for electricity.
Okay.
And that's only in Alberta, because we are isolated from the rest of our own market. So 2 to 3%. Well, right now, that translates to roughly about 3 to 4 wind farms a year. And we've been doing close to that already for the past 10 years with which was very much emerging technology. If you look at how far we have gone so far with wind, we have, in 2003, we had 75 megawatts in Alberta. We were the biggest at the time in Canada. And as of this year, we'll have 1,300, almost 1,400 megawatts. And that's like in 10, 11 years.
And my understanding is that has all been developed without subsidies. It hasn't
my understanding as well.
In Ontario, there's been massive development of wind generation, but it's been done with huge subsidies that have driven up the price of electricity so high that's a real factor in a lot of the shutdown of manufacturing in that province.
Exactly, and it is subsidies do have negative impact on business, and we've seen this in the wind business as well. I'm not trying to single out any particular wind turbine supplier, but it's a well-known fact that if you buy a wind turbine that's going into Ontario, you pay a very different price than if you buy that same turbine that's going into Alberta.
Okay. So you've made the argument that we could produce enough extra wind power to meet the annual growth in demand going forward. How much of that, though, can we store using pumped hydro storage?
Well, right now we have 4 projects on the books. They're largely limited by the interconnection capacity, but I think it would be feasible to put somewhere in the realm of 1,000 megawatts of storage capacity for 8 hours. So it would be generating for 8 hours and pumping for about 9 or 10 hours. So if we put about 1,000 megawatts of storage like that, we believe that you will enable about 3 times as much of wind power. And these are round numbers. It's really hard to figure it out. It also, you start cutting into the economics, and it gets really complicated. So what our plan is we're going to start with smaller projects, about in the realm of 80 to 150 megawatts. And basically
demonstration projects?
I don't know if I would call it demonstration, but perhaps. And then we basically track with the demand. As the volatility increases, then that creates more opportunity for more storage. And we built another one, and we continue to track. So it will add more wind, add more storage, add more wind, add more storage.
Interesting. Okay, we'll watch your progress with interest. Thank you, Peter.
Well, thank you very much.
Peter Bubik from Turning Point Generation. Interesting concept. I'm Dave Taylor, back after this.
License 373933. Foothills Hospital home lottery is already over 90% sold.